Hi Divesh,
Hello.
welcome in Pi Campus. It's really
Thank
great
you.
to have you today.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
So today you're speaking about how to do research for fun and profit. And I know that this is a topic you've been thinking about during your career for time and time again, and you're drawing from your experience with students and with young researchers. Where does this thinking originate? Where does it take its roots? Are these topics that you've been thinking about ever since you were a young researcher? Is it more recent and only came with experience? How's the story of the story?
So, I've always been a researcher. So, when I finished my PhD, I decided to join AT&T Bell Labs research. And over time, I realized that research is a way of thinking, not just what you do. And I've also realized that it's not just people who have done a PhD, right, who are interested in doing research. I know many people who have master's degrees or people who are working in a company like mine or in a startup. They come to me and say, Divesh, I would like to be a researcher. So over time, I've tried to think about what kinds of things help people become interested in research. How can they choose topics for research? How can they pursue the actual act of research, right? Because research is a process. It takes time, right? And you have to think in certain ways. So a few years ago, I was asked to present a talk at a PhD workshop for young PhD students, starting PhD students. And I said, instead of talking about a specific piece of research that I do, maybe I talk about the process of research, right? And so let me see what I can put together. And because research for me has to be fun, it's a process that takes time. And if you're not having fun, right, then you can very easily get depressed. So I wanted to sort of convey that fun, as well as give people the idea that research is not only for fun. You want to make sure that it has real world impact. And of course, impact can come in many ways. So I sort of encapsulated that as, how do you have research for fun and profit? And the talk itself sort of has three major sections. What do you do when you're approaching research, when you want to build the foundations?
Okay.
Right? What do you do when you want to select interesting topics?
Yes, very important.
As well as, once you've selected, what are the things that you have to do in order to have a successful research out of it, right? So there are little stories and ideas that are sprinkled throughout this, right? So over time, I've realized that it's something that, as I give this lecture to people, I also learn from myself how to improve my own research. So it's something that I've been thinking about for a while, but it keeps evolving.
Beautiful. And so you think you'll be giving this talk forever and ever?
Of course.
Several times
Of course.
to come. Yeah.
And every time it will be different.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's what it should be, I guess. And I'm sure it will be enriched every time with new stories and probably with feedback that people are going to give you.
Which is why, you'll see both during the talk as well as, I like to interact with the audience as opposed to just give a talk and wait for them to ask questions at the end. So I'll ask the audience to do the same here, and hopefully we'll see how it goes.
Okay. So, do you think you can do you think you can give young researchers 3 pieces of advice based on your insights that they can take with them, if we try and summarize these things in a nutshell?
Of course. I'm not sure it's 3, but I'll start.
Let's try.
And maybe I end up in 3, maybe. I think the first thing which is very important when I sort of start off is you need to be very, very curious. So if you want to be a researcher, think whether you're a naturally curious person. That to me is almost like a prerequisite for doing research. A second thing is, don't ever get dejected, because research is a process of asking questions, finding solutions, or trying to find solutions. And inevitably, like any adventure, sometimes you're lucky to follow the right path. Sometimes you end up on paths that may lead nowhere, right? And you have to learn that even if you end up in a path that you think leads nowhere, learn something from it, right? So always keep learning. And the third thing, which is sort of part of the title of my talk, is make sure that you always have fun. You're enjoying the process, right? Because it's a long process, whether you do a PhD, whether you do a startup, right? And you want to make sure that the ideas translate into products or services that people use. It's a long process which is challenging. So the only part that is under your control is whether you're having fun. So I would like to give those advice to anybody who would like to think about doing research.
Okay, thank you. While listening to you, I was thinking many of the, I would say, starting situations or the type of context that you contemplate seems to fit or seems to be like a researcher in academia with the freedom to select topics and the freedom to decide what path they will follow. Now, in industry, and I'm not speaking of near academic research labs with this freedom, but instead I'm speaking maybe of startups with a very strong focus on solving one specific pain point, or maybe SMEs where focus is on applying research or translational research that is there to build a specific service, say. Well, in those situations, you don't have that freedom, because the purpose that stands behind the research sort of overwhelms the nature of the choices you can make. Do you think that some of what you say and how does apply to these situations too, and how does it apply?
Yes, I mean, I'm an industry researcher myself, right? And I think of myself as very fortunate. You know, you talked about having near academia, right? In a research lab, I have sort of one foot in industry, right? And motivated by the real problems, the real data sets that I see. While at the second leg I have is in academia, to make sure that any solutions I come up with are useful to AT&T, but are also useful to science, right? And what I have found, at least at AT&T, I don't have the experience of being in a startup company, but in many, many situations, in many projects that I've worked on, it's like being in a startup. What I found is that every interesting problem that I've encountered involves data, right? And as a researcher interested in data, being able to abstract the challenges that exist there, you always find some interesting research methodology that will apply, right? Here at translated.com, right, people are interested in all kinds of things involving machine learning and using it for translation, summarization, many needs. Okay, there's huge amounts of data. How do you decide, you know, what do you want to do for your features to improve the quality of the products you create? More recently, I've been interested in looking at ethical AI. How do you make sure that the machine learning models that you deploy don't end up causing bias and harm against people for whom it is intended to be helpful? All of that requires a way of thinking about it using research ideas. So what I have found, at least in my experience, is it doesn't matter whether you have a specified goal or you have a little bit of flexibility to choose. The process of research, the ideas of research, always brings something to the table that you can employ.
Okay. Do you think what's the importance in your opinion, like in the scale of importance of all the things that a researcher should do, of, I would say, tangible research output like publications, patents, citations?
So you'll see when I give my presentation that I think of research as having three clear components, right? One is sort of asking the right questions. The second is trying to come up with creative ways of answering those questions. And the third is to be able to communicate those results to the community, right? You need all three to have something that has both high quality and high impact. So the communication part, whether it happens through papers, through patents, through prototypes, through systems, these are all ways in which the research that you do can have impact on the real world. But it's very important because it gives you a mechanism to have feedback. And that feedback will help ultimately improve your research, right? And improve, the overall work that you're doing. So doing things through papers, academics do it because it's a way for them to make sure they're at the forefront of the community. Industrial people like to do patents because it's a way to establish intellectual property. There are people who like to do open source or prototypes. To me, all of those are very effective forms of communicating your research, and I support all of them, not one or the other.
These days, I see many young researchers somehow growing, I would even say desperate for some of them, because they're seeing tremendous, extremely fast advances in AI, and they wonder what there is left to do. Very many give up and just walk away from research just for this reason alone, because despite reassurances, they convince themselves that it's done. Some others persevere with more or less, success or conviction. What's your take on this issue, or on this, at least, phenomenon?
First thing is, it's not a new phenomenon, right? If you look through history, there have always been points where people have felt we've done everything, right? So a very, very a nice example that I remember from a very long time back is at the US Patent Office. This was maybe in the last century, early. Somebody said, maybe we should shut down the patent office because everything that needs to be invented has already been invented, right? But no, human creativity enables new things, new ideas. So let's take very specifically AI, which is making a lot of rapid progress. One of the areas for me which is very, very interesting is AI has these large language models in particular, but any kind of AI has been trained on so much data that represents our human history, that it has captured many of the biases that humans have expressed over the years, whether it's against minorities, against women, against any underprivileged group. And today the AI is distilling and amplifying that bias. How do I make sure that the AI of the future is fair, ethical, right? What do we need to do? This is not something that necessarily AI will solve by itself. It needs human ingenuity. It's an example of something that I think will take time, and it's not something that has been solved by AI today. And despite the rapid pace of AI in the last few months, years, it's still a very challenging problem, as one example.
How worried do you think we should be of AI? This is the kind of provocative question to figure out, I guess, whether you think that because humans are just humans, AI, or the pursuit of research in AI, can bring us to the brink of an existential crisis, or whether because humans are humans, they will manage to find solutions to prevent this from happening and AI will actually benefit humanity?
It's a question that has many answers. I'll give you my personal perspective, right? I don't think we should be complacent, right? Saying that we will solve all the problems. And I don't think we should be alarmed, right? What we should do is figure out how can we steer the course going for the future. I'll give you starting with a different example. Let's look at people are concerned about climate change, right? You could do one of two things. Be alarmed, which says that climate change has already started, the world is going to end, there's nothing that I can do that will make a difference, right? Which is one extreme of being alarmist.
Yeah.
The other extreme is to say, let's be complacent, the world has existed for millions of years or billions of years, right? Maybe it'll automatically figure out a solution, right? But what we are doing is trying to find a middle ground. How can we help, right? Change the path so that we don't end up in a climate disaster soon, but also educate people how to do things better. For me, AI has parallels. We want to make sure that we don't alarm people or tell people to be complacent, but let's try to figure out collectively how do we advance in a way that benefits humanity going forward, instead of sort of just throwing up our hands and doing nothing. So I'm in neither camp. I think there's a path forward, but we have to actively do something to take that path instead of doing nothing.